Dark Souls. What can be said that hasn't been said about Dark Souls? I suppose this review is just a little bit late, but I love the game enough to give it a proper review all these years after its release, and to try something a bit new with my channel. Unfortunately, I lack a capture card, so I graciously borrowed some footage from Mori, who provides gameplay from a number of games without commentary. Spoilers will follow. Before we get started, I should note that I had never played the game until a couple years ago for mostly arbitrary reasons. I had obviously heard about the game, knowing how lauded it was for its level design, world building, and of course its difficulty. I wanted to experience something new and rewarding, so I eventually bought the game on a Steam sale, and soon found myself immersed in the world of Lordran. Granted, the game's sequels and younger cousin Bloodborne had been released by this point, but my knowledge of the series was still quite limited. Originally released in 2011 on consoles, Dark Souls took a semi-established formula from FromSoft's previous game Demon Souls, and transformed the series from a surprise hit into an utter phenomenon. Not long after my first experience playing the game, a remaster was announced, and while its reactions have been mixed at best for being hardly different from the original, I can, at the very least, appreciate it for creating the opportunity for new players to enjoy the game. But before I go any further about Dark Souls itself, I should mention how I experienced it for the first time. Truth be told, after about 50 hours of gameplay on my first run-through, I was feeling a little underwhelmed. I understood very little about the game's lore, paid little attention to the world's interconnectivity and depth, I hadn't experimented much with my build, and I had no idea why the heck I was on fire. It wasn't until another playthrough of the game that I started to appreciate the intricacies of its design. For one thing, it's hard not to appreciate the game's lore, even as I really only understand the essential basics of the story. I have always adored games that know how to nail indirect storytelling, and Dark Souls is no exception. From the notes on the loading screens to the charming interactions you'll encounter with most NPCs, the game really goes out of its way to make the story not so obvious. If you want to know more about the lore, well, you can probably already guess whose channel to browse if you've had any interest at all in the series' story thus far. After I understood a bit more about Dark Souls' background on subsequent playthroughs, I finally started to realize just how many ways the game gives you to experience it. Being an open world game, there are many ways, some better than others, in which you can complete sections of the game. Other than being an excellent gateway for speedrunning, this truly emphasizes Lordran's interconnectivity between levels. I can't really put this in a way that hasn't been said to death, so I'll keep it brief. Think about the water wheel in Blighttown. You jump off of it, climb a bunch of ladders, and before you know it, you can take a hallway which leads to the Valley of Drakes. Using a key that you found from a chest a few minutes prior, you unlock a door which leads to some stairs which leads to New Londo Ruins. You can then walk over to an elevator which you can use to go upwards, and before you know it, you're at Firelink Shrine where the journey truly began. This is just one of many examples of a connected world in Dark Souls, but it's one that sticks out to me a lot. It's a shortcut that connects some of the lowest depths of the world to the hub world itself, and while it does take considerably longer to go through this shortcut compared to many others in the game, it does connect not one but several full areas to each other. From Firelink Shrine you can go back to any of the areas you've explored by this point. Back to the Undead Burg for instance, where you can use the ladder you kicked down earlier to get to the Undead Parish, which connects back to Darkroot Garden, and so on and so forth. Overall, this seamless world design makes the progression of most of the game feel extremely satisfying. Until you receive the Lord Vessel in Anor Londo, the need to warp between areas wasn't really necessary thanks to the use of the many aforementioned shortcuts. Just as the world starts to become truly gigantic, you're able to teleport between bonfires at will. And it's hard to mention the genius of the game's levels without mentioning the one that kicks the entire thing off. Dark Souls' tutorial of sorts, the Undead Asylum, isn't really a direct tutorial as much as it is a way to be taught how to approach the game without being yelled at about how to do so. There are messages that tell you how to perform inputs as well as the function of certain features like bonfires, but you're mostly on your own from this point onward. Once you reach the boss, it's obviously tempting to want to aggro him, until you realize that he'll kill you extremely quickly and your attacks are essentially worthless. This of course provokes you to look at the situation differently and find an alternate solution to the problem, leading you through some stairs and corridors until you are eventually able to do a ton of damage with a plunging attack. If it wasn't obvious by now, this sets the pace for the rest of the game, thinking about each moment in an unconventional way by carefully maneuvering your way through the world and paying close attention to your surroundings for possible solutions. As far as other ways to experience the game on subsequent playthroughs, there are innumerably many ways to experiment with its RPG mechanics, specifically your build, which can make each run as refreshing and enjoyable as the previous one. I've always been a melee type of guy, so it took me a while to realize that this was a pretty limiting way to play the game every single time. I had toyed with upgrading different stats in New Game Plus to allow me to wield certain weapons that I wouldn't be able to use otherwise, such as intelligence or faith-based swords, but nothing much beyond that. For me, it had always been about pure strength builds, so trying out the incredible variety of pyromancies, sorceries, and miracles that the game offers you was pretty liberating. I had found new ways to enjoy Dark Souls, and at that point it started to feel like an entirely new game. The combat itself isn't the deepest system ever found in a modern video game, so having this variety available is much needed in my eyes. Some builds do clearly make the game easier than others, but I had already had a handle on the game's core mechanics by the time I started to experiment with it, so it wasn't a huge issue for me to try out different things. That said, people who want to be a magic user on their first time ever with the game may have a bit of trouble at first, as it's not always the most straightforward way to play the game. Another thing I can really appreciate about the aspect of Dark Souls immersion is its sound design. Very little music will ever play outside of boss fights, and interestingly enough at Firelink Shrine. This diegetic approach to the game's sound really adds an extra layer of making you feel a part of its atmosphere. The music that does play at Firelink Shrine is an anomaly of sorts, given that it adds a sense of comfort in a world that is almost completely devoid of any hope whatsoever. The subtlety in this approach, knowing that very little else in the game is like this, is simply brilliant. While immersion, level design, and flexibility are certainly some of the strongest suits of Dark Souls, the game is definitely not without its flaws. The second half of the game is widely known for taking a hit to its pacing, and it's hard to disagree. Many of the more frustrating areas of the game, such as Lost Izalith and Tomb of the Giants, are found towards the end of the game, excluding the excellent DLC, which I'll dive into a bit later. Moments like fighting the Bed of Chaos or hardly being able to see your surroundings certainly try on new ideas, but they go a bit beyond the boundaries of the challenging yet fair philosophy that the game is known for. Everyone knows that Dark Souls is not a platforming game, and while I'm definitely not against trying unique things to keep the game feeling fresh, there comes a point when something just shouldn't be included, and the Bed of Chaos is one such example. Without going into too much depth, there are other moments like this that feel more annoying than fun. Slipping around on invisible platforms in the Crystal Cave, or constantly trying to not fall to your death in the Great Hollow are two such examples. Even if the game isn't perfectly paced throughout, Dark Souls never fails to be consistently surprising and memorable. Other than a few horrifically reskinned fights, the bosses in general are usually trying something new, sometimes playing around a unique mechanic, say, fighting two completely unique bosses at once, which is every bit as difficult as it sounds. Or maybe a DPS-based fight in which you need to kill the enemy as quickly as possible before it starts multiplying. The results vary, but I'm glad at the very least that the game attempts to keep things fresh. While the bosses in Dark Souls 3 are generally superb, for example, I can only fight a humanoid flaming sword guy so many times before it starts to get redundant. In addition to the bosses, Dark Souls is chock full of moments that are simply hard to forget. I'll never forget seeing the beauty of Anor Londo for the first time, or how hard my jaw dropped when this happened. It's incredible that these things can stick with me so quickly for someone who has no nostalgic or sentimental value attached to the game, and I'm sure that this could apply to anyone who has played through the whole game for the first time recently. The last scene I showed was a part of the Artorias of the Abyss DLC, and I said that I'd talk about it. Simply put, the DLC offers some of the best and most challenging bosses in the entire game that are equally as important to the lore, in addition to a few enjoyable areas that feel just as well designed as the ones in the base game. Since it's included for free with the remaster, I definitely wouldn't recommend missing it. The fight with Artorias by itself makes playing through the DLC worth it in my opinion. All in all, Dark Souls is a game that has quickly become very special to me, and once again that is saying something for someone who played the game so many years after its release. If you've never played the game, I highly recommend the original game on PC, as the Xbox 360 and PS3 ports have some infamous performance issues, particularly in Blighttown. To my knowledge, the remaster aims for 60 FPS, but still has some frame rate dips in certain areas on console, but overall it's a huge improvement from last generation. I did buy the game again on the Switch for the convenience of portability, and it seemed to run at a consistent 30 frames per second, but that never seemed to bother me too much. Thanks for watching, and let me know if this kind of content is something you'd like to see in the future, and please provide any feedback on what I might be able to do better.